I have no more campaigns to run.
Senator, you're no Jack Kennedy.
Nobody in America that I know, at least not where I grew up, ever said to me as a kid in class, hey, Scott, good luck becoming dependent on the government someday.
Governor, there you go again.
One even said that efforts to guarantee fair pay reminded him of the Soviet Union.
Challenges for the next president is to restore some civility in our political process. But in the interim, it's ugly for sure.
I want to be president to help us build a future greater than our amazing past. And I will work with anyone to do it.
Whole binders full of women.
Is it right for me? Is it right for my family? And is it right for the country? If I answer all three of those yes, I'll run.
This campaign is not about Bernie Sanders. It's not about Hillary Clinton. It is not about Jeb Bush or anyone else. This campaign is about the needs of the American people.
Plays for the Presidency.
And once again, we welcome you to the Plays for the Presidency. And Alan Kelly is with us. Alan, CEO, founder, Playmaker Systems, author of The Elements of Influence. He tweets at Playmaker Alan. He stayed up late for you last night, just for you, so he could be here this morning to tell you all about the debate last night. Good morning.
Good morning, Tim.
So it was long, but you know what? This is what it's about. I was looking at an interesting headline, and actually Susan Page's story in the USA Today. Can you say President Trump, Republican rivals assail character, call him unfit to lead? And it struck me as something you and I were just talking about before we went on the air, about the plays, not only run by the candidates on the stage, but run by the media, who are a part of this whole process.
The media is a major stakeholder in this, and CNN, I think, probably wanted to differentiate itself a little bit from some of the directness of Fox in the first debate. But if you look at it in terms of what I study, influence strategy, they actually ran the same play. Their intonations and the variables are a little bit different. But Jake Tapper and all the rest were pulling from the same script. They, in a way, they were saying, you know, they would say to Chris Christie, "Did you know that while you were out of the room, that Scott Walker said this about you?" And Donald Trump, "Did you know while they were in the room that Carly Fiorina said this?"
Did you hear?
That's a bait.
It's like office politics. It's a bait. Okay, that's the play.
Yeah, that's the bait.
Okay.
A bait.
Who took the bait?
Well, that's interesting because certainly one of the most interesting points in the debate was where they brought up, you know, the face issue with Carly Fiorina, and she didn't really take it. She ran a play called a deflect. She says, "I think that women in America really know what that amounted to."
Here's what she said.
You know, it's interesting to me. Mr. Trump said that he heard Mr. Bush very clearly and what Mr. Bush said. I think women all over this country heard very clearly what Mr. Trump said.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a form of a diverting play called a deflect, where you are, you know, sort of not trying. You're trying to kind of dodge the point.
It was pretty surgical, I thought.
It was very artful.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, and that can take us into a long discussion about Carly Fiorina. Mm-hmm. I think that...
well, let's do, because by consensus right now, she's the headline story out of last night's debate.
I rated her in terms of just, you know, rhetorical or influence strategy. I rated her as the winner. I rated Chris Christie as the second. Rand Paul is the third, and Marco Rubio is the fourth. Now, I don't think that'll necessarily resemble how most people rack it up, but for the people who are trying to manage their agenda and their point of view for positioning, repositioning, what we sometimes call depositioning, I thought those four did the best job.
There's no particular piece of audio from Carly Fiorina which captures this, but the essential takeaway was that she had her facts and her figures and her specifics in order last night. And does that figure into the playbook? How would one describe a play where you're just giving you lightning hits on particular pieces of information?
It's a play called The Mirror. It is a freezing play, if you will. There's actually more freezing plays in our system than any other. It's a way to make again the rhetoric sort of stop and go in a different direction. And it's the metaphor is you hold up a mirror to say, well, Senator, in 1992 you said blah 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 blah. I think that Fiorina was probably best prepared in that regard. Marco Rubio, Rand Paul, all three of those. Were very good at with their litany of facts, as you say. I might say Kasich, but I think that the error that Kasich made, I think that in a way he was the worst prepared because he did a very good job of getting himself into discussion, but then he just talked about himself. and it sort of was flat in a way. It wasn't contextually or competitively relevant in the setting of a debate.
On the Carly Fiorina, one, I would like to get your reaction and what kind of a play she's running here. There was an extensive debate. We'll get back to Rand Paul in a moment. There were a couple of issues where he was hitting a strong point. That is, let's not get into wars overseas, that sort of isolationist libertarian view of whether federal government needs to do, and also on legalization of marijuana. This is Carly Fiorina, though, specifically addressing whether or not the federal government needs to get involved in enforcing these laws.
Very much hope that I am the only person on this stage who can say this, but I know there are millions of Americans out there who will say the same thing. My husband Frank and I buried a child to drug addiction. So we must invest more in the treatment of drugs. I agree with Senator Paul. I agree with states' rights. But we are misleading young people when we tell them that marijuana is just like having a beer. It's not. And the marijuana that kids are smoking today is not the same as the marijuana that Jeb Bush smoked 40 years ago. We do. Sorry, Barbara.
Yeah, that is an important point. It was an emotional one. It got a laugh at the end. But what kind of play is she running there?
You've got me.
Okay. Because she's got a couple of things wrapped up in there. She's using a personal story to reflect that she wants to argue against the idea that, just to say, let's legalize marijuana, and it's not so much the federal and state issue that Rand Paul was trying to make it out to be.
Well, I think there's a lot of what's called framing going on there. She's recasting, she's filtering, she's using the play called The Screen, which is to invoke symbology and history or some sort of issue or things like that. So I guess you would say that's where she is. And this is broadly in the area of conditioning. She's trying to put her spin, I think that's not really quite the right term, on a really detailed issue, and she's making it very personal by running that screen. She brings in her the fact that they buried a child. So again, it shows her facility.
Versatility. She ran a lot of plays last night.
She was unintimidated. She was not intimidatable. She couldn't be intimidated, and I think that what everyone, I think, has noted is that she probably flustered Donald Trump.
Well, again, Alan Kelly with us, The Place for the Presidency. You mentioned Governor Chris Christie. Let's listen to one little soundbite from Chris Christie last night.
While I'm as entertained as anyone by this personal back and forth about the history of Donald and Carly's career, for the 55-year-old construction worker out in that audience tonight who doesn't have a job, who can't fund his child's education, I got to tell you the truth. They could care less about your careers. They care about theirs. Let's start talking about that on this stage and stop playing the games.
All right. So what kind of a play is that?
Well, it's actually a play that Mitt Romney runs a lot. And it's called A Challenge. It's a pressing play. And it's a little bit like a bait, except it's more like, let's all of us do this. Let's be this. Now, Christie in his inimitable form, brings it across in sort of a blood knife sort of way. But indeed, he's saying, let's grow up. Let's think about, the people out there who are really watching, who really need jobs, and stop talking about your egos, is what he almost said.
And I want to get to make sure that we get all these candidates in here and all the plays.
Well, that'll take a while.
The top four that you mentioned, including Senator Rand Paul, as I mentioned, he was pretty extensive in his defense of his positions on things like whether states should have sovereignty over the federal government on drug laws and so on. But he also said this about the military and wars.
But the thing is, the first war was a mistake, and I'm not sending our sons and our daughters back to Iraq. The war didn't work. We can amplify those who live there. The Kurds deserve to be armed, and I'll arm them. We can use our Air Force to amplify the forces there, but the boots on the ground need to be the people who live there.
Now, you mentioned the Marco Rubio also. Let's get his take on another part of the military discussion.
If the United States military is going to be engaged by a commander-in-chief, it should only be engaged in an endeavor to win. And we are not going to authorize use of force if you're not putting men and women in a position where they can win. And quite frankly, people don't trust this president as commander-in-chief because of that.
Okay, so give us a sense of what plays were being run by both Senator Rand Paul and Senator Marco Rubio last night.
Well, I think all of them are, obviously they're trying to differentiate themselves. Rand Paul, I think, was much more direct. He would simply say, look, this is who I am, and I'm different because of this. And he flirted with, GOP doctrine to do it. That may make him even a less popular candidate than the 1% he's got. Marco Rubio, by virtue of what he does and has been doing in the Senate, has foreign policy chops. And he wanted just to, rattle on and tell stories and show his prowess. So in that regard, he was running, multiple plays we call fiats. Just I think this, I think that, I think this, I think that. So they're both a little bit different. But I do think that both of them were calm, were articulate. They avoided all of the massacre, the shrapnel that's happening all around Jeb Bush and Donald Trump, as did Chris Christie. I think they did a good job.
One other thing that Senator Marco Rubio said last night, and this on the issue of gun control, and I thought this was a really interesting encapsulation of what Republicans, I think, want their position to be.
Criminals, by definition, ignore the law. So you can pass all the gun laws in the world like the left wants. The criminals are going to ignore it because they are criminals. Now,
that's just a statement. I don't know if that's anything other than, as you called it, a fiat before. But it was an interesting encapsulation. It's like, well, it makes no sense. It was a tautological argument, is what it was. Just trying to give us the logic of it all.
Well, there's that play we call a screen. He's using a particular example to enrich a point that he wants to make, and then he came prepared with a lot of them. Just like Fiorina. You can tell in this debate who really prepared and who didn't. And obviously the one who really didn't was Donald Trump. I think he came across as lazy, whereas people, like Rubio, were completely at attention.
There's one other I want to run. It's actually from the earlier debate, just because I wanted to make sure that we got this on the air today. Senator Lindsey Graham talking about the relationship that President Ronald Reagan had with Tip O'Neill.
Ronald Reagan did a couple of really big things that we should all remember. He sat down with Tip O'Neill, the most liberal guy in the entire House. They started drinking together. That's the first thing I'm going to do as president. We're going to drink more.
Here. We're both Irish.
That's yes, we are.
Yeah. I think that
I don't need that encouragement, though. By the way,
I thought in the undercard that Lindsey Graham was the winner easily of the four, and I think he'll probably elevate into first string.
Yeah, you got to show up in the polls. He's still an asterisk right now.
Yeah, but I think there were some pretty bland performances. I think that could knock others down. I'm thinking in particular about Scott Walker. I think he was probably one of the biggest disappointments. I think there will be room for Lindsey Graham to come up.
We will see. Lots of plays last night. Thanks for staying up late last night.
Sure.
To look at all of this stuff, to watch, and to let us know what you thought. Thanks so much. And,
all right, let's go to the bar.
Let's do it.
Let's drink some more.
Time to start the drinking that Lindsey Graham has asked for. The plays of the presidency. Alan Kelly, thanks.
Thanks, Tim.
Alan Kelly, who is the CEO, founder of Playmaker Systems, author of The Elements of Influence. And again, we'll check out his blog. We'll post what he is posting. You can go to @PlaymakerAlan, ALAN.